Live.
Right, evening everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us on this backup testing webinar. So we're looking at Taskwarrior, which is a command line interface, kind of I guess a scheduler or a planner. I'm going to do a quick round of introductions. My name is Tony Bruce. That'll do for me. I'm going to flick over to Alan to introduce himself.
Hi, so my name is Alan Richardson. I blog at eviltester.com, and we're all part of this blackopstesting.com group, so you can check out our website. And Steve, you can go next.
I'm Steve Green, Managing Director of Test Partners. Been doing exploratory testing now for about 13, 14 years. And over to James.
My name is James Lindsay. I'm a test strategist, which means I work with people to decide what's important to them, what they value, what they fear, and that then turns into a plan. Strategy is not a plan, something else. I am going to look at Taskwarrior first, briefly, so that I can show you a few things about how it works. We picked Taskwarrior because it's a different kind of thing from what we've tested before. For you. Specifically, it's a command line. It's a command line task handler. Can you see my screen at the moment? Say yes. Yes, James. Good. What you're seeing at the moment is a terminal interface into Mac OS X. It turned out that for 3 out of 4 of us, Taskwarrior is a particularly easy install. You access it by typing task. And it tells you there's nothing in that database. Typically what task does is tells you what's next on your list, but I've got nothing in my list. Let me show you. Task. List. No matches. So I'll put a new task in. Task. Add. Go to the shops. Task. List. Type. Task. List. There we are. Go to the shops. Was added 7 seconds ago. And I can put in a second task. Task add, adapt or die, due Tuesday. It might be able to get this
Your
one right.
Your syntax is wrong.
Tell me what it should be, Steve.
Due : Tuesday.
That's an unpleasant piece of the body. Right, adapt, adapt or live. Due : Tuesday. This is fun to do live. I'll just change that Q because it might do something else.
And there shouldn't be a space after the colon.
Right.
But it might be okay anyway.
Have you actually used this application before, James?
Come on. So there we are. So what we've got is Steve's absolutely right. The one that was 5 seconds ago has got a red thing on it. It's saying adapt or live. It's something special. It's due Tuesday. It's worked out the 23rd is Tuesday. It's got a whole bunch of tasks in there. If I go next, task, next. There we are. Well, it's going to always give me the top one by the look of this one. It'll give me the only one that's got a due date. It works out tasks. You can start to align your tasks given. Say that one's more important than another one, or one is dependent on another one. You can add some. It's a list manager based on tasks. It does plenty. We've scooted across the surface, I think. I'm going to hand over to Alan, who's going to show you what he did with it. But imagine it's a list manager for tasks.
I can tell people what we did with it. So, where to start? Because I was expecting Tony or James to go first. So, let's start with, because it's a command line tool, right, and I'm not used to necessarily testing command line tools, the first thing I had to figure out was how on earth am I going to monitor this particular application, and how am I going to check to see what's going on. So since I've got an ugly screen here, what I decided to do was add multi-tail on my screen. This thing on the right is multi-tail. So when I go into the task screen and I say task add Bob, you see over there on the right that in the history, or in the pending data, there's a new task being added. And you can see in the undo list, there's a new task being added as well. So by having multi-tail, which is monitoring the files in the task directory, I get a little bit more insight into the innards of what's going on. Also, what I've got when I'm doing the testing is up here I've got an editor. This seems like the easiest way of doing it. So if I look at the undo data, it tells me the file has changed, so I can reload that, and then I can see that right down the bottom, it's a big file now, it will show me all the undo data, and in the pending data that's changed, so I can just reload that. So I needed to get some more visibility when I was testing it than just testing it, and I used those tools for it. The other thing I wanted to be able to do was to use the history as a way of tracking my testing. So I make a lot of notes when I'm testing anyway, and I'll release those notes when I go live. But the thing I wanted to try and do, let me see if I'm in the right screen here. If I type in history, because it's a Unix machine, it tracks pretty much all the tasks that I was doing. So what I can do is, as I was testing, I was saying things like echo I will test that I can delete something. When I press that. Good thing about command line tools is you have to be able to touch type really well. And it's the bottom of my screen, and I've got all these Google Hangouts as sharing notifications, and I can't see anything that I'm testing. So if I do task, it will show me what tasks I've got, and I will delete task number 5, so I can do task 5, delete. Yes. And if I do history now, you see those entries in the bottom. So I can then save off the history file. The other thing that I was doing is when I was doing tasks that I didn't want to do, because I had to look up how the history works because I couldn't remember. If you do a space and then a command, then it doesn't show in your history list. But if you do the space, you just do the task, then it does. So that was a way of keeping tasks out of my history list. Let me just delete that last one. Minus D27. Right. So I've been trying to use the history list as a way of tracking my testing in addition to it. So what I was doing is, as I was testing, I was exporting out the history list to a file. I had Dropbox on my Linux VM, and I was saving all the files into Dropbox, so it was automatically syncing across all my machines. So I had all these different things hooked up in order to give me some insight into it, which I think means that I was probably testing slightly different from the rest of you guys, because I was seeing things coming through in the changing of the files that then led me to do other things in the application. So we'll jump over to someone else for the moment. Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about what you did? Give a quick intro.
Yeah, okay. So I started to, well, I knew nothing about this application, so the first thing was to find out sort of what it was and basically work out what my context was. So I'm going to show you the. I used a spreadsheet for all of my tracking, so I'll show you this here, and right. So my context was that I've got 3 hours to test the application, and from looking through the website that described what it did, I figured you could spend weeks on it. So I was only going to be able to scratch the surface and had to figure out what's a sensible thing to do with the time that I'd got. It very quickly became obvious that the time-related functionality wasn't going to be testable, and it wouldn't surprise me if there were going to be some very nasty bugs there. However, that's for another day. I was going to have to just focus on things that could be tested in real time. The documentation, it became immediately apparent, is very poor and incomplete. I was hoping there would be a list of all the commands, because in the absence of a GUI, how do you know what the thing can do? And what I found was that whoever wrote the website didn't do a list of commands and parameters and that sort of stuff. They just put some random thoughts down that were not very helpful. And so actually here tried to collect all of the different commands and the parameters that they supported as I was reading through the website. Even then you had to guess at the data formats for the parameters because that just specified anywhere. I later found out that the application itself has a help command that does list a lot of parameters, who knows a lot of commands, who knows if it's all of them. But even that doesn't list all the parameters, doesn't give you any indication what the formats are. So even if you know that you can apply a date as a parameter, you don't know what format to use. Now, I wasn't able to install the application on my Mac for some reason, just didn't want to do it. So I was testing on a Linux version on an AWS instance. That introduced some restrictions on the testing that I could do. In particular, I couldn't search and edit files. Also, I found after, well, near the end of my testing, that I should have used Chrome because it doesn't work properly in Firefox. Certain characters.
Steve, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. Can we all mute our microphones while Steve's talking because we're getting some feedback?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so certain characters I just couldn't type, like minuses and tildes and things, and that was just a Firefox bug, nothing to do with the application. Unfortunately, I didn't find out that in time. So that was my context, really. And actually, for us in the test lab, it's quite a familiar one where you're given something you've never seen before, and you're expected to jump straight in and test it with no prior knowledge, and it's pretty unintuitive. So the let's put that back. So the approach I was going to take, that I usually take with pretty much anything I'm testing, is to build up in progressive layers of complexity, starting with simple tests, going through to more complex ones. And so I was planning to start with things like data validation, input constraint, just looking at permitted characters. But that actually turned out not to be very useful because there are a lot of the characters that are interpreted by the shell before they even get to the application, mostly all the symbols. And that's already a known issue. It's quite well documented in the application. And so long as you read the instructions and follow what they say, you're not really going to have any problems with putting characters in. About the only one that was a problem was putting single quotation marks. You're allowed single and double quotes, but you must use them in pairs. If you don't, then the application appears to hang, but actually I suspect that's the shell misbehaving, not the application itself. So I decided not to spend any time doing tests at such a low level and to go on to the sort of next level of things, which is sort of to do with data flow, where the data goes when you put it in, and also trying some basic tests on each individual command that I didn't expect to be very fruitful, but actually some of them were. And in fact, I hit such a rich seam of bugs, all relating to conversion of basically dates from one format into another, that I really never moved on from that and got on to the more complex stuff that I suspect the other guys did. And it was surprising just how buggy all these conversions were. So anyway, I won't go into those now, but I'll hand over now to Tony to talk about the approach that he took.
Or James. Did you wave?
Or James.
Interrupt.
Or anyone.
You're on mute.
Wretched mute button. I thought I pressed it twice. Stuff that I did. I took a two-part attack. The first part was to set up a whole bunch of data. The second part was to use that to play. So let me see what I can show you on screen from what I did. Let me hit this thing here. I should be able to share something that none of those things are familiar to me. That's no good. He says that's not my Excel sheet. Let's go there. So I expect that now, once I share this with you, you can see my notes. These are my notes. I'm using something called Omni Outliner Pro for this because it lets me fold stuff up. I thought there were some interesting ways to play with it after I'd looked at it for a while. I thought the undo was odd. The undo data looks like a description of what it could, what it did, not a rollback to the previous database. It looked like there was an existing bug that would say you can't filter on certain characters, so I knew there was a problem there. It's a command line tool, so I could try some fuzzing, which I've not done in ages. And then I found some interesting stuff around changing the databases. But I thought to do all of that, I would need some data. So I'm just going to switch off that screen share and share with now my Excel spreadsheet, which I'm kind of hoping is this one. Does that look like the Excel spreadsheet? It does. So this was my basic set. I had 256 characters. I had a test which put one of those characters at the end, one in the middle, and one at the start. Although I definitely added, I definitely identified each test with the character number as well. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. He says. I'm not sure that...
That's okay, it's readable.
It's readable? That's good. Well, you'll be able to see that, of course, characters up to 32 don't say anything. We've got task add at the start because I wanted my data in. That's how we add a task. So I created a whole bunch of task add things. And then I found that made a complete mess of everything and didn't give me data that I could actually test with. It just blew the shell up. So then I started to play with reducing that set in escape. Reduced it to 33 up to 255, and I used escapes on all of these things that felt like they were special characters. That's special characters because they were listed in the man pages as special characters. And over here you can see this is what I ended up with. These bits of text went into TextMate, which is much easier to work with in the shell than anything else. Alan, in terms of what I was doing with TextMate allowed me to put information in, but it also allowed me to watch files live. So I had all 4 of the database files open in TextMate, and as I was entering them, I could see changes happening in those files live. So that was nice for me. I liked it. It was a kind of window open onto a command line interface.
So does that mean that TextMate pulls the file or monitor is notified when it changes and automatically updates?
Yeah, OS 10 notifies whatever's got anything open. So TextMate is quite nice for watching files in that way. Well, TextMate 2, anyway. I think TextMate does it, but TextMate 2 certainly does it. So that was nice. It was all live and changing as I watched it, so that was cool. I got all these things in, and then I put them into 2 sets of results. So I put 3 sets of 32 to 255 lines in. I ended up with 670 something tasks. All of them went in okay by the look of it, as in it didn't blow anything up. But then I was able to compare those back in Excel, as you'll see here, and you've got my thing saying it was okay or it was not quite okay. Most of those were on the escaped things because I couldn't be bothered to write a little tool to take my escapes out. So when it turned up in the database, the escaped stuff wasn't escaped, which is what you'd hope for. However, a few things looked odd, and that started me off on another round of testing. I can show you them here, but I can describe them more easily if I go over to my notes. Incidentally, things like this, where it says name, this is the joys of working in Excel. As soon as you have an equals at the start of anything, it just balks. And same with a plus or a minus. Anyway, back to my notes, which I shall have to unshare and reshare. These look like they're my notes. I'm dealing with tiny, weeny little thumbnails. So I set up a whole bunch of data. That gave me lots of tasks. I could then play with it. Visually, it looked like there were problems on plus and minus. It looked like there were problems on greater than and less than. And all of those are because those have meaning to Taskwarrior. If you put a plus on something, it says that's a tag. So if I want to tag go to the shops with errands, I go to the shops, plus errands. Or indeed, plus errands, go to the shops, because whatever that tag is that single word is tagged wherever it is in the sentence. Now that means that there are some oddities. Both plus and minus work as tags. Minus strips a tag off a task, even if you're adding it for the first time, so there's nothing particularly contextual there. But it means if, for instance, I have a task that says do some negative testing, and I've abbreviated negative testing as minus VE, it strips out the minus VE and it tells me I should go do some testing. So that was a cute one I enjoyed. So a few things got stripped as it went in, and the minus sign getting stripped is possibly the most painful. Other things that were a bit odd was occasionally it would add a space in between a special character and the word it was following. Sometimes that was because it was an escaped one, some of the escaped ones weren't. It was a bit inconsistent. So there's a couple of oddities there. The minus is certainly something that would frustrate me. We get to the filtering though. Now the reason I'm in filtering is because I know there's a bug around filtering. I played with the less than sign. Let me see if I can bring up some of this. And am I currently showing you my notes? I am. That's good. So if I try going task less than 100 list, because I've got, let me just pop up a few things here. Boom, there we are. So I've got two tasks in there. The first task is a question, so easy for me to understand. Is the FAT test less than 100 units, or is the FAT test less than 1,000 units? Let me see if I've got something in there. So you might be able to see here, I'll highlight it for you, that I didn't have a space, and here where it's listed, I do have a space. So it's added a space. How do I filter on that? Well, let me first try filtering with less than 100, which is what I put in the first instance. Then I get no such file or directory. If I try to escape that, I get there are not enough operands for the equals operator. Both of those are failures, proper failures. The job has abnormally ended. So then I thought, well, there's got to be a way of doing this. I put it in quotes. I tried putting it in space. I put it in quotes, not in quotes. It all just didn't work. It didn't find the right records, didn't bring the right things back. So there we are. It's got filtering problems. We know it's got filtering problems. I went off after that to chase after numeric things. So I said, can you filter on? Let me see if I've got this open here. Can you filter on a number? So I put job 25 as a possible task. Now I want to filter on 25. List me job number 25. Can't find it. If I ask for number 2, it gives me the second one I put in, which is what you might expect if it's not dealing with numbers. So it can't filter on an unadorned number. I thought I had a little bit extra in there, but yeah, it can't filter on an unadorned number. If you put a I'm surprised not to see the right thing. So if you put, let me see, a number with a text suffix, it doesn't work until you get the suffix into your filter. So 25 job would work, 25J would work, but 25 doesn't. Does that make sense? So there are problems with filtering that go beyond the bug they've given us. The bug they gave us was to do with it goes wrong when pluses or minuses are in the filter. You put greater than or less than in the filter, it goes wrong. You put numbers in the filter, it can't find anything. that was what I did. It took me about an hour once I got the data in, and that's the end of my testing. Got any questions, chaps?
So did you look at the bug reports that were outstanding before you started testing? Is that why you zoomed in on filter?
I did, yes. This particular bug report was, I can, not there. I can give you the thing. It's PW1418. Let me see if I can pop that one up on screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I'll do that one. So yeah, operators do not play nicely in filters. The unit test patch is pretty simple. It's got 3 things in there. I was wondering whether at the end of this I would put a couple of comments on saying, well, here are some extra bits that you might want to get into your unit test. My guess is this is no great surprise to anybody on the project, but it was a surprise to me, particularly as I had a couple of things that I would really want to search, and I'd want to search occasionally on a specific number because that's sometimes how jobs identify themselves to me, and I certainly want to have an abbreviation like -VE testing accepted. I would like to have that one thrown away or need not be filtered on. So those were yes, you can see that bug there. That's all you need to see, I think.
And the test data that you created in Excel, how did you get it into the application? Because you didn't convert it into JSON and import it in. What did you do?
No, I didn't. I saved it as a text file and then used a command source. And what source does is it treats a text file as a command file. In the past, I would change the permissions on it so it's executable and then use dot. So if the commands are called James's commands, I'd go .James's commands and it would run them. But as it is now, I use source and I don't have to go through the bother of changing the permissions. So if you do have a command line application, you can generate an awful lot of things for it to do. Model-based testing might be fun on this, fuzz testing would be fun. And you do that just by generating a text file and hitting source and then the name of the text file, and it runs everything in the text file as if you were the user running it. I think changing directories is a bit different between source and dot, but as long as you're doing something relatively straightforward with commands, then there you are. Yeah, does that give you hints? Yep. I doubt it gives Alan hints, but it might.
I find that it's useful because we don't normally work with command line very often. I had to look for a whole new set of tools and a whole new set of usages for how we test this.
It was fun doing a command line. I've not done one for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's great, and it clearly opens up a lot of possibilities for relatively easy automation. I mean, I was only at the end of the day that I found an easy way of tracking it. So by installing a different terminal, I installed Terminator. Terminator's got a plugin that is a logger. So you can start the logger on, and then you see all your inputs and all your outputs, and they get saved into a file. Because I initially tried to do that with the script command, but the script command shows all the escape characters because it's the terminal emulator, and it's really hard to read. But there's probably other terminals that have a logging functionality as well, but Terminator has one built in, so that was nice and easy. I'll use that next time.
Because it's got a slightly longer name, because Terminator, I imagine, is going to bring up a lot of search results. Is it easier to find?
Well, if you do Terminator terminal, I think it's pretty easy. It's pretty well known. But I've got links, I think, in my notes. Let me see. I'll see if I can share my notes with you. It's on my third screen. I'm not sure if it's gonna.
Oh, posh. I was using OSCAN's terminal application because I like that, and TextMate too.
Cool. So these are my notes. Essentially, I was making notes on how I could do this, how I could monitor it, what Unix commands I need to remind myself, what syntax and various other things. Because I also wanted to have timestamps in my history file when it was coming through. So I had to figure out how to do that. Because your history file normally just shows numbers on the side, but I wanted timestamps in there so I had a proper log. So I started by looking at, I read the basic documentation, the 30-second guide, and it said, here are the couple of commands. So I had a quick look at some of the commands and did some experimentation with it. I didn't really find any problems at this point. I'm just investigating it and trialing my tools to make sure it works so that I know how to clear down all the windows in multi-tail to see what's going on. So it was only after I had a break that I came back and started to do some proper testing. So I was looking into IDs because I thought the ID was interesting, because the ID is not a field that's in the data files. If you actually look at the data files, you don't see an ID in there. You see GUIDs, you see entry timestamps, things like that. The ID is generated based on the where it is in the pending file, I think. So I thought for a future set of tests I would probably look into that, but I didn't investigate that in detail. What happened was I found the info command, the task info command. Is anyone able to get their terminal up? James, are you able to share your screen with a Taskwarrior instance? Just to throw you in at the deep end.
Sorry, something's come in from somewhere else. That am I on? Hello.
Yes, you're on.
So I need to share my screen with the Taskwarrior instance. Yes.
Yep. Just so we can show a task info command. I would normally show it, but we discovered earlier on that if I try and show my terminal, the colors are ugly and I've got it on magnifier, so it all zooms around. So I'm going to ad hoc press for the other guys.
There we are. I should be in this one.
So could you just do something?
Yeah, task info.
Yeah, task 3 space info.
Yeah.
So what this shows.
Can you read that?
Yeah. So this starts to show the kind of things that you see in the text file database. Now, if you'd done some actions on it, some modifications on it, it would also show the actions and modifications you've done on it. So when I'm looking at that, I start to think there's quite a lot of information in here. Now, there's also a modify command, and I wondered what I could actually modify in there. So I tried to modify. So if you do something like task 3 space modify, and then if you do UUID colon.
Yep. So I'll just put some rubbish in the UUID.
Don't put anything in. If you put stuff in, it will reject it. So you leave it blank.
Mm-hmm.
So what it's actually said is, I've just modified that task.
Uh-huh.
But it hasn't, right? What's cool is you haven't modified the UUID, but if you looked at the undo file now, then you would see that you've actually, in fact, if you do an undo, do task undo, see what happens.
Oh, Carl, I've got the last modification was made today. Taskwarrior no longer supports file format 1.
Yep. So the modify command is really powerful and lets you get in at the innards. It doesn't have quite as much protection around it as you might want as a user, but that's cool because you don't normally delete commands using the modify to change the status. You can, right? But normally you'd use task ID number and delete. So I started to just explore the modify command a little bit. I mean, what I like about task is that because it's all text files, if you get any issues, you can just go in and amend the text files. Like you can easily delete that entry from the undo file, and it will all work fine from that. So I just kind of explored the modify a little bit, and there's a couple of kind of minor bugs in there where it can let me modify things I probably shouldn't. Like I probably shouldn't be able to modify the ID because it's a calculated field. The system suggests that you can modify it. You can't. What it does is it creates an ID attribute on the task, which is then subsequently ignored. I don't know if you can normally create custom attributes or not, but you certainly can by using the modify command. The modify command also helped me out later on because you can delete a task by modifying the status to deleted. So when I was experimenting with the recur command, the command that lets you make a task entry recur after a period of time, I set my tasks up to recur every second, and every time you refresh the task list, you then have a couple of hundred tasks in it if you've waited for a couple of minutes. And I couldn't figure out how to delete a recurring parent task, because you can't do a delete command on a recurring task, but I was able to use the modify command to change the status. So the modify command is really powerful, and I probably wouldn't want to fix some of the things that are classed as bugs, because they're kind of really powerful features in the system. So like the info command, really powerful, gives you a lot of information in there. Modify command, it's really powerful, gives you a lot of information there, and lets you bypass some of the controls on the system, which I find quite interesting. And that's probably it. I mean, I've actually got quite a lot of notes, because I made a whole bunch of notes as I go through. I'll be sticking these in GitHub when we finish, so that all the data that I used is in there. But for me, it was less about finding bugs on the system, and more figuring out again how I can actually test command line apps and what the possibilities for this are. And you almost wish that every single app that you used had some sort of command line interface, because it's the tools that you get from Unix, the way of generating test data, the way of piping stuff through, the way of tracking your results is so enormously powerful and useful.
Mm-hmm. I love having an API. Yeah. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
I can almost see why people like keyword-driven automation, because it's almost like having a command line. But because the keyword-driven automation is designed for automation, I think it's a really bad way to do automation, but I think it's a really good way of giving you an interface for exploring really quickly and for using off-the-shelf tools to feed stuff in.
I love it for throwing data in, and I particularly like that we could just switch databases. I can just change one line in the configuration file, be in a whole new clean environment, and it sets a clean environment up by itself in an identical way. You can just tell that it's lovely. Yep. So that was really nice for testing, and I could see myself writing a whole bunch of big data here, and then little things to scoot through it that would then reveal more to me that I could go explore. Felt like a nice target for that. Yep,
and because it's simple text files, you just do a zip command on the where it's storing your data, and you've zipped up your test environment, and you get it back whenever you want. You could hook in GitHub or something else and automatically save the data every time it changes. I mean, it's just so much easier to work with.
Mm-hmm. That was lovely about it, yeah. So, we had a question from Dan about have we tried any performance stuff? It's got text files to store data. Did anyone get enough data to start seeing a performance degradation?
So the thing is, it depends what you mean, because I mean, it's using Unix with grep and all the find. If it's using actual out-the-box Unix tools, they're so fast at the command line and the file system anyway. I mean, I only put in 900 odd tasks. Because I just set up that recurring task, and I just left it going for 20 minutes, and then a whole bunch of data until I could figure out how to stop it.
I got 600 in about 8 seconds, so I wasn't bothered.
Yeah, I think it handles a lot of tasks and information pretty quickly. Remember, it's pretty much a batch system. I mean, I was able to use the modify command to delete a bunch of commands, but that didn't take effect until I actually listed the task list, because you can change the files, but it's only when you do a task list that it kind of does a reintegrity check. I mean, I suspect because it's batch, it's loading everything up, it's doing all the actions it needs, it feeds it back and forwards, and the undo, James, it's got the pre-state and the post-state, so you can just kind of roll back to whatever it was.
Does it? I was doing it with really small numbers, and it didn't seem to have a pre-state at all. It told me what it had done, but it didn't say what it had come from. And I thought, oh, is it actually going to have to undo it?
Oh, mine showed the before and after state for each of the task entries.
Well, in that case, I've misread it. I looked at that for a bit and thought, oh, bugger. Yeah, there's a performance test set that uses 8,000 tasks as a test. I bet it does. I bet it's very easy to put an awful lot in there. Not my worry. You know, this is meant to be a one-person at a time task manager. 8,000 tasks is probably as far as it's going to go. The thing that I would be interested in terms of performance is every time you put the task command in, it fires itself up again. It's not a daemon. It doesn't sit there and wait for you to do anything. So you put task in, task add, task this, task that, and every time it starts up and it reads the configuration file .taskrc. So if that is something that is, if that gets too big for some reason, or if it somehow starts to spin on taskrc, if there's something wrong in the configuration file, then that will stuff it. So that was the only thing I was worried about at all with performance. It just looked like it was going to go flat out as far as my machine would let it.
So the only stress risk that I found, in a recurring task, there's a single string that represents the state of all the kind of child tasks from a parent. So if it somehow had enough tasks to blow out whatever the string representation in the programming language is, then it might break. But I imagine the strings are allowed to be pretty big, so it's unlikely that any single user is going to create a recurring task that has so many items that would blow out. Because even doing it on create a new recurring task every second, I think it would still struggle to blow out that single field. I mean, it might get slower, but I think it would work pretty well.
We can all think of elephant tests. We can all think of things that would flatten everything. But it struck me this is going to be, within what we're going to investigate within a few hours, probably not as interesting to look at the performance as to look at functionality. That was my feeling for, I can think of ways to flatten it, and it would just bring the machine down as well. I'll do something else, do something, frankly, more interesting. But yeah, there's always weaknesses. You can always think of big things to do, but this is meant to be ultimately, firstly, a single-person thing. Secondly, for people who are
pretty techy,
self-selecting is going to use a text-based task manager.
because it's there, it's text files. You can write your own parsers, you can grep it, you can do whatever finds you need if the functionality isn't there. I thought it was quite useful. So Richard's asking questions about file permissions and locking. I didn't test any of that stuff. I imagine it could be a problem when you start to write with it. I mean, it's Linux, it's got file permissions in there. Locked files, things can read files and lock them at the same time. Certainly that's been a problem on some Windows systems that I've worked on. But again, as James pointed out, because it's a single person system most of the time, these risks become lower. If you are recurring from some sort of backup, then possibly there might be a file permission thing. But I imagine any user is going to be technical enough to resolve that pretty simply.
Mm-hmm. I've had text made open on my database files since I've started testing, and it's not. I've currently got 12 database files from 3 environments open.
I think you'll find
worried.
TextMate's pretty good and is better than Notepad, which I think does lock them. Is it Notepad that locks them? One of the Windows editors locks it.
To be honest, a brick to the head is better than Notepad, but that's
But if TextMate has got a hook into the operating system to track the dynamic updates, then it's probably not going to do anything stupid like that.
Yeah.
So Taskwarrior have a number of plugins, so it's not necessarily just a one-person app. There is a task server, which I didn't look into. There's also a couple of front ends you can use. So I don't know. I didn't actually look at any of them. I don't know if anyone else did.
No.
If you pretty much spend months on this thing.
Yep.
Yeah. The interesting thing for me was that it was a terminal. It was a terminal application. I'm going to put it in the test lab because we haven't had one. Here's a command line. There you are. Blink, 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 blink. Off you go. I like that. I think it's a good thing to go test. And as Anne pointed out, actually, you can do a whole bunch of things very easily with a command line you might not otherwise be able to do, and it's a good way to get yourself sort of up and going.
If you can remember how it all works, if you can remember your Unix knowledge, we've lost those skills.
I put a little thing at the bottom of my note saying "how to." Yeah, absolutely. And I thought, why have I done my data with a spreadsheet? Why have I not just written a little shell script? Why have I not done anyway? Don't know. The
interesting thing, I think now, if you were building data, you probably wouldn't use a shell script. and you probably end up using like a really simple Ruby script or something in one of the Ruby libraries, because you'd find it a lot easier to find the information about how to do it in Ruby than you would in how to do it in Bash.
Yeah, and you'd be able to read your code. It's just, yeah. I looked into Printf and just found my forehead hitting the desk. It's horrible.
I mean, just going through it, there's so many things you think, I need to figure this out. I need to learn how to do this. That would be really useful. This seems really easy to automate. I mean, the source thing, I'm going to look that up. That seems really useful. But it would be really easy to automate from just a simple script as well, because it's completely batch. You just exec it out and trap the result. There's no horror of trying to capture interactive output, except when you try and delete something with a yes/no. But there might be an override in the command line for it not prompting you.
Yeah, don't know. I found it remarkably easy to delete every single task. I believe it's something like task delete, and it does everything.
It is case sensitive, I noticed as well.
Beg your pardon, Tim?
It is case sensitive, the commands, or at least delete was. Didn't try the rest.
And one of the interesting things I found about the commands was you can truncate them. So you can, instead of typing in task 3 delete, you could type in task 3 del or task 3 de. And I think it's only the most significant characters that are required. So from left to right. Because I tried to do a random task to not have it work. So I typed in task 2 app something, but app was short for append, and you can actually append things on the description. So I accidentally found a command.
Yeah.
By doing that.
It's definitely dangerous for the fatter finger, this one. If you, like me, you're typing and leaves a little bit to be desired. You find yourself doing things you weren't expecting to do. So, therefore, your users may well do something that you don't expect them to do, because they don't expect to do it either.
But that was cool. I found it pretty interesting to work with this, and there was so much that you could have done in it. I mean, I'm looking at my notes. I've got 18 pages of notes just working through this thing. I mean, you only spent what, an hour on this, James, and you've got like a huge set of notes.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not the world's most prolific note taker when I'm in the testing mood, as happens to a bunch of us. But yeah, loads. But
that's why I think with these tools, it's really cool, because if your terminal can log it as you go through, you've got commands that could just insert documentation, like an echo command that will just print down to the field. It's in your task entry. You usually grep these things out, parse them, replay them back in if you needed to. You can capture the state of the database. It's so simple.
I just scroll back up for things that I wanted to. If I'd seen a problem and I thought that needs a specific little test to actually highlight what the problem is, you put the test in, you put the thing that shows you the result, hit copy and paste, and out it comes. And it is just a neat little bit. It goes straight into your notes, and it's lovely. So that was dead easy for me. No screenshots, no mucking around with this state, that state. Here's what went in, here's what came out. And because you can switch databases, just do it in a new database if you need to.
And there was always new commands to find. Like Alexander's just posting in new commands that I haven't used in there. Because I think this is one of the tools where when you start needing to do something, you start looking for that command and you find a way of doing it. But if you try and absorb all the documentation at once, it just kills you, because there's so much flexibility in there.
Jeez. You look in the configuration file, it's got one thing, data location. You do this thing that Alexander's just told us, task show, and there's lots. When I say lots, I'm still scrolling down. It's just loads. So yeah, there's clearly plenty of configuration one can do. Urgency.blocked.coefficient -5, if you know what that is. Send a postcard to the following address.
Yep, and that means there's plenty of testing to do. The more configurable it is.
Yeah.
Did anybody look at how age is handled? Because I noticed it started rounding off at one point. So some of the tasks added in yesterday, I look now, and they're all aged at 1 day. They weren't all put in at the same time. I don't know if that's. I've not looked at the documentation. I don't know if that's configurable, how it rounds up.
It appears to round to a minute after the first minute and to an hour after the first hour. So I'm assuming it's a day after the first day, and it may yet a week, year, month. I don't know. Steve, you did a bit on that, didn't you?
No, I didn't. Most of what I did was looking at. I barely got beyond adding tasks, to be honest, because there are so many things you could add a due date in the future, in the past. You can add by day, week, month, year, and there were just so many bugs around that I probably should have moved on, but I didn't. I just kept on finding new boundaries. So let me share my my spreadsheet, and I'll show you a few of these things.
It's interesting because I wasn't sure some of the things I was finding were actually bugs, because I spent so much time with the modify command that I was able to modify the entry date to be kind of 68 years in the future, so tasks wouldn't start for 68 years and the age is all shown as negative numbers. But I wasn't sure that was a bug because I'm using one of the strange features.
No, I think they're bugs. So hopefully you can see what's on my screen here. So I was setting up here recurrence and setting due dates of 99 weeks was fine. 9,999 weeks. Gave an error message that this big long number is not a valid date. So we got some poor sort of error handling there. So I thought then, right, let's do the old binary division thing and find out where the boundary actually is. And it turns out to be between 260 weeks and 261 weeks. That one works, and it gives you a date in the past. And the same sort of thing happens with days. So when I set where's the number of days? Here we go. Turns out 1,824 days works, and one more day doesn't. It says a day in the past. So there was loads of issues around that. I also had to play with things like fractional weeks, and they all worked fine. There was nothing in the documentation to say whether fractional weeks were supported or not. So I just tried a few things, and it seemed to round up and round down in a sensible manner. I was going to test things in the past by having negative number of weeks, but because Firefox wouldn't let me put a minus in, so I couldn't do that.
You were stuffed by that thing I gave.
Yeah, well, if I'd have realised Chrome does support the minus thing, but I only found out much too late. So
lovely, but
so I put some actual dates in, and I can't remember where the boundary is for actual dates. I think I nailed it down to somewhere in 2037. It worked up to there, and it failed in 2038. It set that about 100 odd years ago. What else do? We tried. That was an interesting one. I put in a leap year for next year, and got the error message: found extra operands. So not really sure what on earth was going on there. What else do we try? But apart from that, it seemed to handle like the leap year in 2016. It did add that correctly. When I manually set dates in the past, again there was a problem, but there were two boundaries here. So going back to about 1966, you get you get this error message saying the duration and then a date was not recognised as valid. And somehow it thinks that when you put in 1st of January 1966, it thinks you're putting in a number of days when you're not. You're putting a date. So then if you go back a bit further to 1965, you get a different type of error. So I think going back as far as 1974, tasks were added correctly, but as you go back beyond that, there are two boundaries, one that gives this error and one that gives another error.
But also you get different boundaries depending on how you represent the date. So you got boundaries there when you represented it in the day, month, year format. If you put it in as 69 weeks or 69 years, you get different boundaries. So there's a whole bunch of conversion going on.
Yes, and the system supports ISO date formats and loads of everything except British date format. It obviously wouldn't support that.
I couldn't get it to support milliseconds. I tried to create recurring tasks in milliseconds, but I couldn't do it, which is probably just as well.
Yes. So what other things did I... yeah, it seems pretty bad that if you want to put dates in the future specified in the number of days, then your luck runs out in 2019. That's when 1,824 days in the future is. Not very far at all.
But then you might be able to specify in terms of weeks or years.
You can, but if you're the sort of person that uses this application, you might not like to do things like that.
If you're the sort of person that uses this application, that's what you do. You use it however you have to. I think it's actually fine for its user base, and it's so flexible. It doesn't fit my workflow, otherwise I'd be tempted to try it more. But also I was looking at it in terms of, because it's command line, if you were actually testing another command line type app, this might be really good as a way of kind of tracking what ideas you had, what tasks you wanted to explore next, because you'll be at the command line all the time. You just type in task, I want to start looking at this thing, task, I want to do this, task, I want to look at that. Then you've got the list there in front of you, it's tracking a log for you. You can hook in plugins to hook it into text files, so you could hook it into your whatever session notes you've got. If I was doing a lot of exploratory testing on command line apps, then I think this might make its way into my workflow not as a task manager, but just as a kind of to-do list manager to help me with the exploratory testing.
Yeah, it's a nice little sort of file box to put things into, particularly as you can prioritize and wake things out and tag it. And so yeah, I wouldn't particularly use it for anything other than here's information I want to tag on. And that I found actually might be handy for me in a couple of different ways. So I was tempted to use tasks for other things.
I think we're judging too quickly because we've barely touched the surface of this thing. We might find it really useful if we spent more time looking at it.
I'm not saying it's useless.
I mean, no, but I mean for our uses. I mean, I literally looked at the 30-second tutorial and that was it. So some of the stuff like how urgency is decided, I wasn't sure how that happened. Everything I put in was a 6. I have no idea why.
There's a really complex algorithm for calculating urgency, and you could spend weeks just testing that.
Yeah. And I found things like my task list was truncated to 13 lines. I don't know why. And then when I do it again, it would show all 15 lines.
It happily showed me 668.
Yeah, I've only got about 17 tasks in there, but for some reason it likes to truncate it intermittently to 13 lines. Yeah, so I didn't spend as much time as you guys did on this, so what I did was focus on adding a task and then using that to generate some further ideas to look into. So some of the stuff that I wanted to look at further was, like I mentioned, how age works. James already kind of looked at that as well, might be rounded off. And whether that's configurable, I'm assuming that's configurable if there's so much stuff in that show, what was it, show task? Not show task, yeah, task show, that it's probably in there. I did want to jam in loads of tasks, but I also had it on my list to look at the testing framework, so it seems like there's already a test that will jam in 8,000 tasks, so I probably wouldn't bother. I thought about changing permissions on some files and just removing some files, and what I could do with the logs, or just having a look at logs, which I didn't do.
Oh,
Also wanted. Say again, sorry.
Has it got logs?
There are some. Oh, well, that's what I wanted to look into, whether there are actually some logs. I would assume there are, but I've not investigated further. This is on my list of things that might be good to test.
Yeah.
And briefly, what you did as well, looking at some different characters. This simple thing of just looking at the size of the description and what happens if you start mucking about with your system time, if that's where it actually reads time from. As I mentioned, looking at the testing framework, seeing what tests are already there, and to investigate what else is configurable, as in pointing to databases and so on and so on. I only spent about 40 minutes on this just to generate some test ideas. What else did I look at? Yeah, the age thing had me confused for a little while. And simple things like trying to add a blank task, which was just rejected straight away. I did ask add task with the same description. You didn't seem to mind that whatsoever.
No, it's perfectly valid.
Yeah. But yeah, so I didn't get as far. Well, I did get as far as finding out the what do you call it, ID, which kind of explains why you can add multiple tasks with the same name. And that was pretty much what I did.
Right, I found another conversion issue when I did a JSON export. So I'm just going to show you the screen for that. So what you should be able to see down the bottom here, in that line there, is what happened to the record with ID 29. Because when you look in the actual the pending.data file, the dates are stored in some, I'm not sure what format they're stored in, but when you do an export to JSON, it converts the dates into this ISO format that you can see here. And it looks like the task with ID 29 had a date of 1963, which seems to, although it stored correctly in the first place into the pending.data file, it blew up when that date got converted into ISO format for the JSON export. Because I've got like 60-something tasks here, and it just bombed out at the 29th one. What I didn't do was look at whether any future dates cause it to blow up, but I'm sure they will.
Yeah, I never got a chance to do the export. I mean, I've just done one now, and my mad entry dates in the future hasn't caused it to blow up in any shape or form. So I think you've managed to find probably the most serious bug out the lot of us there, because you've actually broken the export, and that's not one that the users can easily work around without actually changing their data.
Let me unmute myself while I ask this question. Can you import that back again, Steve? Did you get a chance to try that?
I didn't. It was actually one of the last things I did at the end of my time box. And also, I wasn't sure if I could import it in any way because I was using this this AWS instance. So it was all. I couldn't do some of the things that you can do when you've got it installed locally.
It's interesting that the JSON export actually exports the ID even though it's a calculated field.
Yes, it does seem a bit curious why it does that, because the website explicitly says that the ID is not really a useful thing because it will, for any given task it will change.
Well, it's calculated. I mean, you can. I was able to modify the ID and add an ID in, but because it's calculated, the one that's on the entry itself is ignored. So it's a strange thing. And same as urgency, that's a calculated field. I wouldn't expect that to be exported. I guess exporting the urgency is relatively useful because you can parse the JSON file with your own code, but the ID doesn't seem relevant.
Well, it's a snapshot of your data at the time that you might want to pull into something else and use. But yeah, it wouldn't be very useful to import the IDs back in. It would have been nice to actually sort of edit this and import it back in. I'm sure there are all sorts of things you could do that would cause it to mess up, but didn't have time for that, sadly.
Yeah, but the import-export is probably important because that's the kind of easy way of backing up the system.
Mm-hmm.
Easy way of backing up the system is save the files.
So that's the way that I backed it up, but it may not be the most the way of moving between different versions of the application, right?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, changing the version.
Best.
And of course, it's all. I don't know if we've explained this. These are all in hidden files as well. You can't find it unless you know how to touch the hidden files on your system. So yeah, you can't really just save it off the top of your head.
Yep. Because I was looking at it as this is an application that most of the people that are going to be using it are going to be pretty technical. So even though there are user-friendly features like delete commands, and I might end up only learn one command, which is the modify command, and just do absolutely everything with that, because that's the kind of person that I am.
Well, I think we've all taken very different approaches to this. It's because, because this is Black Ops, and that's what we should be doing. That's good.
Yeah, I guess actually the import and export would affect the versions, because if you have a look on the website, the latest stable one is 2.3. When I installed it through Ubuntu, I got 2.2. So if you're not paying enough attention, you may get different versions and not realize it, and then try your export and import and just totally mess everything up. I don't know. I've not tried it yet.
I had a look at something saying it's now on its third format. The Taskwarrior files are on their third format, and it is obscure. That's what I read somewhere. Yeah, I wouldn't like to change the versions. Although today I changed to 2.4 by mistake. I did brew uninstall and then brew install after I'd done brew uninstall. Changed version without wanting to. Nice to do in the middle of testing. There we are.
Cool. So I think we might have to stop. We've been doing this for an hour and 10 minutes, and some brave souls have stuck with us for that.
I just look to see how many people we've got. There's loads.
Wow, we've still got most of them. That's quite impressive.
Yeah,
do you guys not have anything better to do?
Yep. So well done, everybody.
Paid attention for now. Of course, they're not paying attention. We're just on a screen somewhere in the corner of the room. They're watching Doctor Who.
So we will do a blog post that summarises bits of this. I mean, I'm going to shove my notes and data in GitHub so you can play with that if you really want to. The guys will release whatever else they can. And it's worth pointing out that in January next year, we are doing a face-to-face workshop where we will do exercises like this with whoever is attending, trying to explore and experiment with different ways of testing things and learning from each other. Because that's partly why we have these webinars, and we have chats outside these webinars so that we can learn from each other on an ad hoc basis. And those face-to-face, what they call workshops, are good ways of doing that, because we try and push as much as we can. We test these apps, and then we try and get back as much learning from the people that are there, because everyone has something interesting to contribute when they're testing these things.
I do believe we've got some space left on the cheap side for Black Ops testing in January as well, but just a few.
Yeah, I think there's four early birds left, and early bird ends, the end of September?
Yeah, you've got about a week and a half. No, week and a bit.
Assuming those 4 spaces last that long.
Yeah, it's because they'll go. If you've had fun learning, then please do share what you've learned with those around you. And if you want to learn more, we've got this thing in January, and we'll have a few more webinars before we get to it.
We will be doing some more webinars, because I find this really useful for me to get back up to speed. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we do next time and what we come up with.
We haven't decided on that yet, have we?
So I guess that'll be it. So thank you very much, everyone, for staying with us. I will say bye-bye. Anyone else want to say bye-bye?
I'll say goodbye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
All right, I'm stopping. Bye bye. Stop broadcast.